welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In this week's episode, I welcome the incredibly talented author, Drew Paige. Drew grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. She graduated from Bradley University with a degree in psychology. Drew worked in 2 mental health facilities as a mental health worker and also a caseworker on the Southside and Westside of Chicago. With over 10 years' experience in the social services field, Drew worked with people with mental illness, abuse, and neglected kids. In this episode, we explore Drew's trauma recovery journey and tackle topics like mental illness, relationships, sexuality, healing, and more. Drew's story is inspirational because while she was helping others, she saved herself in the process. I love her passion for the work that she does and her devotion to helping others. We had a fantastic time on the podcast, and I know you will take value from our conversation. As always, thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of the episode. Also, please support my upcoming book, Trauma Propels: Turning Obstacles into Opportunities, by heading to the pre-sale campaign page linked in the show notes. So stay tuned, and as always, keep listening. Hi, welcome, Drew. I'm so glad that we finally get together and have this conversation. I'm really excited about this today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm really, really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know I was watching on social media and I saw you had a lovely break. I saw the beautiful photographs, so you must be refreshed and rejuvenated.
I really am. I had a reset. My kids and my husband, we went to Aruba for 8 days and 8 nights. And, it was really necessary. I think after the pandemic, just getting away, it was wonderful.
Yeah. So today is going to be an interesting discussion. On the podcast, we kick off with our own trauma. And I would like for you to share with the listeners, if you would, your story.
Absolutely. I really have been holding all of this in. When I wrote my book, I was 44. I'm 45 now. And I read a book and I was like, I have a story to tell. So my story really started when I was 8 years old and my father began to verbally abuse me. He would call me crazy and he would just be mean. And I think I was internalizing this word and this abuse. It was very confusing for me. And then at age 12, he began to slap me occasionally. And then at age 14 is when everything really set off. It created my diagnosis, actually. I was 14 and I was home alone. And he came home to get tomato juice for the neighbors next door to just make some drinks. And he's like, who drank all the tomato juice? And I was like, I did. And he was like, why did you do that, you asshole? And then it just set off everything. I had a big mouth. I was grounded. And it was the biggest mistake I've ever made because I ended up paying for it. So, for about an hour and a half, he brutalized me and beat me and verbally abused me. And, that is the first chapter of my book. So throughout my life until I was 40 years old, he was verbally abusing me, covertly sexualizing me. And he never hit me to that level again, but, occasionally slapping me in the face. So that's my story. I really, growing up, had to deal with, I knew something, I had something, I just didn't know what it was. And at age 30, I went for an assessment, a mental health assessment, and I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. And what's kind of ironic is I went into social work and worked in mental health and worked with people with schizophrenia and bipolar 1 and all of these different disorders in foster care for 6 years with abused and neglected children. So at the same time I was working with these people, I was saving myself in a very bizarre way.
I'm listening to you and you're talking about different levels of this disorder. Yeah. You're saying there's bipolar 1, there's bipolar 2. Is there a difference?
Because I worked in the mental health field, I knew there were 2 different bipolars. And bipolar 1 is, you have trouble sleeping, you are exhibiting a lot of energy, you are, you have a belief that you have greater importance than others, displays anger or aggression in behaviors. It's the inability to realize inappropriate behaviors. So really, like, there's mania and depression, and mania can show in different ways with different people. Some people, go out and spend like $20,000 on a credit card when they don't have the money. And there's like a constant high. And then there's a crash, they're depressed and they can't take care of their hygiene or leave the house. And bipolar, it's one or the other, and it's very extreme.
Wow.
A lot of people who have bipolar 1, not all, because if you have the right medication treatment team, it can be controlled. But a lot of people with bipolar 1 are hospitalized because it is very hard to function in society. And what I have, bipolar 2, is the person has at least one hypomanic episode. So I've never had full-blown mania. Hypomania to me looks like I'm in a good mood. I'm super over talkative. I have like a decreased need for sleep, but I'm not up all night. It's kind of like in the middle,
Right.
And my depressed mood, it looks a lot like depression, right? It can get very dark. But again, it's not as magnified, so to speak. So it's functional because I'm on the right medication and have a good treatment team. It's doable and I have a good life, but it's also a lot of work. But there is a huge difference. I mean, people who see me, you would think I'm quote unquote normal. People have always been gravitating towards me socially because I'm fun and, but in the inside, I've been hiding what I have my whole life.
So when you were diagnosed, and this was at age 30, was there any kind of a link to the brutalized relationship that you suffered at the hands of your dad? I mean, could this be tied back? I mean, or was this just something that you had all along?
Well, everybody's predisposition to have a mental illness. Some people, it triggers the chemicals in their brain to have this disorder, and it takes a traumatic event, right? So I never knew this. So if I was never beaten to that level, it would have never, I was always predisposed to have bipolar 2, but because of that incident, I have this mental illness. So it is connected. And what's interesting is I never realized that until I did research, I was devastated, honestly, because it could have never happened. I could have never had this disorder. So it's all linked.
And so what is it like for you and your family living with you being diagnosed?
It's interesting. I write in my book, it's like a game of mood Russian roulette. I wake up and I really don't know how I'm going to feel. But for me, a lot of it is situational. Like if I have arguments with my family, or that sets it off, or, if my daughters are having a really hard time, if my husband and my relationship is tough, it triggers things in me. Living with me, I've always been very, I guess, independent, and I do need alone time. So I always take time for myself, but I've really learned to manage coping skills to have a good non-chaotic home life, So I would say living with me it's not always easy, right? But it doesn't look like mental illness, if that makes sense. It's not like living with a person who's unhinged. I just have normal emotions like anybody else. It's just sometimes when I'm in a depressive episode, I kind of fold back, if that makes sense. I'm more quiet. I'm just not as engaging, and I get agitated more easily. But I've also been in a marriage for 18 years, and mental illness or not, relationships are a roller coaster, and it's work. So, that's kind of how it looks for me. I have an Instagram page, Drew Paige _author, and every post I have is the emotions I'm feeling that day. And it's kind of like a set off for me to keep a line and see where my moods are at. Like I'm a hopeless romantic. I always have been since I've been born. And, romance and connection and music and all of these things make me feel things. So I post a lot of romance on my page as well, because I feel those emotions, and we all think of these moments in our lives. But there are days that I post very depressive stuff. And somebody one day, it was funny, but so not funny. My humor is ridiculous. But she was like, under one of my posts, a lot of the stuff you're posting, the images are very disturbing. And I'm like, life is disturbing. It's like not every day is going to be a surrealism picture of amazingness. Like this is how people feel when they feel depressed. And again, like I think on my page and in life with this whole process of writing this book, the connectivity of what I'm putting out in the universe is real. Like I'm very real, and some people love it and some people don't. And that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. And I follow you on Instagram and I love your page.
I think, men, women, any sort of relationship and any connection, I think these posts that I'm making it makes people remember what romance is, because I talk about this with a friend of mine. Like, he is 35. I work with him. He's a screenwriter for my memoir, and he's turning it into a film.
So congratulations. Congratulations. That's so exciting.
So exciting. So we always talk about, like, I talk about when, I was growing up, there were no phones. And if you saw a person in a bookstore on a street, that eye contact, because I'm 45, it was next level. And you connect on a level like these posts, right? It's like so deep. And in this day and age with the phones and the screens, I also have a blog on Medium. I write about like, what is love and why do we fall? And it's like that chemistry. I think what I put on my page reminds people of romance too, which is it's kind of great.
Yeah, no, it's true. And especially now with COVID, the dating has become so difficult. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was saying, my 23-year-old son and my 30-year-old son, both of them are saying, Mom, where am I going to find a girl? Because I can't go to a party, because that is usually where I will meet a girl. Or if there's a extramural activity at the universities, that's where I will meet a girl. So now everything is behind a screen, and they're saying this is very, very difficult for us, and so they don't have that opportunity to experience this romance that you're talking about, and that chemistry when you see someone and you think, oh, I like you, I'd like to see more of you.
It's incredible. And I've been out of the dating game for 18 years. I wouldn't even know what to do, but
I'm in the dating game.
You are. And I feel for you, because the truth is, it's like, you're this brilliant woman, and you're up against like, all of these women who it's like, again, it's that connectivity piece. And I think with men and women in this day and age, they are, it's like a competition of sorts. I mean, back then, there was a competition, but it was different. Everybody knew that if you go out and you meet somebody that you connect with at a club, at a bar, at a bookstore, whatever, it's real. And now I think there's so much, I hate to say it, but it's like, it's filters, it's fake, you don't know what you're going to get, honestly, I'm sure. So I think it's really interesting. I feel for you, but whoever gets you is a lucky person. Really.
Thank you. Thank you, Drew. And I think, for me, the way that you move beyond those filters is if you stay in integrity. And I think if you stay in your integrity, you'll very soon see if the other person is in integrity.
I agree. And I think, listen, when you meet somebody, if you have a flow, a connectivity, if there's a thing that goes along with connection. It's like connection, it's attractiveness, it's intimacy, it's looking into somebody's soul instead of just looking on the outer. But like us as survivors as well, it's a vulnerability piece, it's a trust piece. And that also goes with my story. When I was single, I was vulnerable with maybe, my husband and maybe one other man, so it was tough for me because I was much like a man in the sense of I couldn't, and I'm not saying all men are like this. They're not. I'm generalizing, which is horrible. I'm saying in terms of there are certain men and women who put up a wall because they're scared, and then they end up not allowing the other person to be close to them. And that was what I did.
Yeah. I kind of did the opposite. I was very vulnerable and I shared quite a lot, but it wasn't necessarily received in that way.
And how was that received for you? Because I can explain how it was for me, but for you, how was that received?
It was devastating. It really was devastating and heartbreaking. But it was the kind of thing that I knew I was not going to carry with me into another relationship. I was not going to become afraid and put up walls because I've done a lot of work on myself. So I wasn't going to let someone else's wounds let me take 5 steps back. So that was important for me.
That is important. And I think for all of us, our relationships are a blueprint for what's to come, what works, what doesn't, what feels safe, what doesn't. For me, I always let the man be vulnerable and I would listen. And when it came my turn, I used being sexual as a touching plate. So, I wasn't rushing to get close, even though on the other side for the other person, it felt close, which thinking back is very hurtful. And I have regret about that. I really do. I was fun to date for sure. I made it very easy. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, no, 100%. And if I think back to my very early dating days, then I can identify 100% with you. Because everything was sexualized and everything was about control.
Yes, that's what it was. It was control because my whole life, with my dad, I had this male figure in my life who I had no control, and the men who had come in my life, and so many of them were great men. I kind of was like, you know what? I'm going to take control emotionally so I don't get hurt. But there's one man in my book who he literally broke my heart into 10 pieces. And it was a whirlwind romance. And it was the only guy, and this is so horrible. This is the only guy I dated who wasn't good looking. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for this guy because he's got something. And, he literally broke my heart into 20 pieces. And I wasn't even that vulnerable with him, but he swept me off my feet in romance. And he brought me to meet his whole family. It's in my book. And he ended up like breaking up with me on the stoop of my apartment. And it was my first depressive episode, all because this guy. And I look back and I'm like, what was I doing? But
I'm laughing because you were saying that this guy wasn't attractive. I think, but then you were like head over heels. And I do identify with that because I also have that story.
It's so funny. I'm like, you're not my jam, but I'm going to give it a go. And it was funny because he definitely had this romance piece that I was like, damn, you've got your game. And that made him attractive. I wish I never would have given him the chance. And what is weird is he lives in the suburb next to me. So I see him. But I think everything happens for a reason. You live and you learn. And, after that, I met my husband. So it wasn't meant to be. Thank God, because I wouldn't have ended up still married.
Yes. And I think, some people come into our lives and they are only meant to be a season. They are meant to only live their purpose. And that's it.
It was a season. And the funniest part is like, I'll never forget when I received an email. It was like after I got married and he was like, I should have married you. And I wrote, well, it's too late because I actually found like my partner. So I was like, thanks for doing me that favor for dumping me on my stoop. So I think in my life, like men have played a huge role because that was a lot of my hypomania, honestly. that dating piece for me.
Yes. I'm thinking that when it comes to normalizing, especially after severe abuse, sexual relations within relationships, for me, that was a big deal. But luckily, once again, I'm in a family that recognized that I needed help. And, they introduced me to a sexologist. And so I very early on was lucky enough to have that intervention and to actually, understand my own sexuality, understand my own body, know what it was that I liked, know what it was that I didn't like, know what I could give. And so that for me was also a very big part on the trauma recovery journey. And it's important that, that aspect of the relationship following severe trauma is also addressed, because it also needs to be a healthy part of the overall relationship.
It is. And I don't think a lot of people realize the sexuality piece connected to trauma. It really is so interconnected. And I think there's so much shame attached to it. Like, it's interesting with everything with the sexuality and the sexual piece in my life. I have no regrets, right? I have good memories, right? But then I look back at certain parts of it and I'm like, that was very dysfunctional. It wasn't healthy. And so I never got the experience that you had with seeing a sexologist or any of that. And I praise you for doing the work, because that's not easy. It's really looking deeply in yourself. And sexuality in general, people talk about it in this day and age, but I don't think people really talk about it. Everybody has an easy time talking about everybody else's sexual stuff. But when it comes to them talking about themselves, and again, I'm generalizing, I'm just talking from experience. I have a few friends that it's open talk, but not many people can go there,
Yeah. And, for me, the biggest lesson that I took away from that was that when it came to promiscuity following severe sexual violence, my doctor made it very clear that that was a very normal side effect and that there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. And I think not a lot of people get to experience that, or get to hear that, or get to understand that, get to feel that. They just think there's something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm. And the shame is attached to it. I'm a slut, I'm a whore, and it's also societal, what society says about women and sexuality and feeling sexual. And that is all connected. So for you to be able to have that experience of really understanding your sexuality and where that was coming from and the connection is major.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit more about shame. And for me, shame is the one emotion that lets you hide the truth, that allows you to justify circumstances. And the shame is so great that you can't actually share what happened to you. When we experience this heavy shame, we wear a mask when we go out into the world, and we have a narrative that we tell ourselves and that we tell others in order to cover our reality.
And I write that in my author's note. I wear a mask my whole life. And you really articulately said that beautifully, because I carry so much shame and so much, and I use the word embarrassment about my diagnosis and about what I have, because I feel damaged. I use the word damaged and broken, because the shame I carry, that's where this depression piece comes in. I wish that I didn't have what I have, because it makes me so mentally exhausted. And the shame that I carry about what I've gone through and how I've had to feel alone in this journey, even though I have people who support me, I look at myself in the mirror sometimes and I feel, why can't I just be my authentic self when it comes to my trauma? And I guess I've never been the person to want pity. I've always been looked upon as this strength, and I have these kids, but inside I feel like I have a shame label all over me, and it's painful. It actually makes me emotional because shame for me, like I would say 80% of the people in my life don't know about my diagnosis. And I fear, the people in my community finding out about my diagnosis, and I'll be labeled as crazy. And that also makes me want to cry. And I'm not a huge crier, but it makes me feel sad.
Yeah.
Shame for me, as you notice, my whole tone changed. It's so deep and so painful. And I wish that it would go away.
In my experience, I found that courage is the antidote for shame.
Yeah. Again, this Instagram page, it sounds so silly. I've met so many strangers for the first time. Some of the shame is lifted. My diagnosis is part of who I am, but I wish all the advice that I give others and all of these posts I put about courage and all these wonderful things, I wish I could feel that way.
But I commend you because you've done so much. You've written a book about it and you've put this out there in the world to help others. That took major courage, and you had to dig really deep to bring forth an authentic piece of yourself. That is a big deal, a big, big, big deal.
Thank you. I feel, like I talked about, I'm working with this Andevix, and as we're working on the screenplay, it's very hard to delve into this trauma. But I think what working with him has taught me is he's allowed me to see within myself by helping me write my story to film and getting the stigma of mental health erased, which is all I can hope for. Is my book becomes a huge success and bestseller and film, not for fame and fortune, but to help other people feel less shame. That's it.
Yeah. And I think also in doing this process, writing the book, and as you know, there's the editing process, which is rewriting the book, because I know this professor that says the best books are not written, they are rewritten. And
Yes.
that is it's a healing process, rewriting that book, because it desensitizes you to your own trauma, right? And so you are continuing that work because now you are rewriting this once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6 times to get it to screenplay level where it can now become a movie. And I must tell you, Drew, that in doing this process and in taking on these projects, you are healing and you are stepping out of your trauma, because going back to the trauma the way that you do and looking, because you're standing in front of the beast, right? You're standing in front of the beast and you're saying, okay, here I am, let's do this. By the end, you will be able to step out of that trauma and leave that shame behind.
That's all I can hope. I have moments of overwhelming fear that, I can't pick myself up. In writing this, there was a moment of a breakdown in front of Devis, and I didn't know if I could pick myself up. I did, but writing the screenplay was way more difficult than writing my book. I never allowed myself to feel it writing my story. I did, but I didn't. And even these talks on podcasts, I don't realize how emotional, like this is the first where I've kind of broken down because it's so heavy. And in these questions you talk about, you bring up certain words like shame, and it just gets me because I carry it every day.
Yeah, I completely identify with what you're saying here. Breaking down, writing, the screenplay, because I put out a podcast not too long ago before my computer broke. And I said that in my book writing process, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I listened to my doctors and they said, do not go to the internet. We are the doctors. You are the patient. You concentrate on getting well. And that's exactly what I did. I brought my stress levels down. I was lying in bed. I was doing everything I could do to heal mentally, physically, spiritually, all of that.
Yeah.
And so when I wrote the chapter in my book on cancer, and I
Yes.
really had to do the research on cancer, what is cancer, how does it happen, what does it happen, what does it do, I had to step away from the computer because it was completely overwhelming. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that I actually never tapped into the severity of the disease that I overcame.
And I'm so glad you overcame. And looking at that information is very similar to looking at the research about mental illness and my stuff, and it brings you to a place of, whoa, this stuff is heavy. And you say to yourself, I can't speak for you. I said to myself, I can't believe I survived, because everything we read with the statistics and the information, and it's so loaded, you and myself, it sounds like you have to step away. It's just like, this is a lot to retain. But like I said, I am so grateful you survived. And I listen to your podcast all the time. And you have a place on this earth to not only heal yourself, but heal others. And I think it's wonderful.
Thank you, Drew. That means so much to me.
I mean it.
So when we talk statistics about, mental illness, when you were diving into your book, what kind of interesting statistics did you come across?
Shocking statistics. It actually made me feel a little more settled because I'm going to read these statistics and it's wild. So, this is from the National Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health, and it says by the numbers. 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness each year. 1 in 6 U.S. youth, 6 through 17, experience a mental health disorder each year. 50% of all lifetime mental illnesses begin at age 14 and 75% by age 24. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34. 20.6% of U.S. adults experience mental illness. In 2019, 51.5 million people have a mental illness. And people who have major depressive episodes, 19.4 million people. Bipolar, 7 million people. Anxiety disorders, 48 million people. Post-traumatic stress, 9 million people. OCD, 3 million people. And this is people who are not diagnosed. And this is before pandemic, right?
I was going to ask you about the pandemic. Is this in the pandemic? Because that would have added to these numbers.
Correct. Which makes it, when I read these numbers, I felt more quote unquote normal. These numbers are next level. Like 51.5 million people have mental illness. The numbers don't lie. So the statistics, when I saw these, I was shocked. I really was. I was shocked because half the world is walking around over medicated or not medicated and feeling like they want to die. And that's the saddest part of all of this.
And the statistics that you read about suicide, age 10, that is so young.
It is so young. And I have a 16 and 13-year-old daughter. And there have been moments where my youngest daughter had said, oh my God, one of my friends on Snapchat, this boy said he wanted to die. And I had to walk her through what to say. And he was 11. So it's real. And I think, because these kids can't talk to their parents, adults can't talk to their friends about it. It's very difficult. It's a silent killer, honestly.
Yeah, sure. That is shocking. Absolutely right? Shocking.
Like my main goal is to get a TED Talk and to go around and public speak everywhere because I think education's knowledge. And because I have a mental illness and because I've worked in mental health for 12 plus years, it's so cool to have somebody on both sides of the spectrum to have the information. And seeing somebody who has a mental illness, normal, so to speak, it's helpful because then it helps other people like me and even people who have severe mental illness feel normal. And that's what our world needs.
Yes. Talking about going around and really spreading the word, doing your book, having the movie, all of these are things that you are doing, as an individual. But there are so many organizations out there.
Yep. I've reached out to everybody and their mother. And you know what the weird thing is?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to look for literary representation to get on these talk shows and do all these different things. And nobody wants to touch my subject. No one. So organizations I reached out to, which I won't name because I just don't think that's right. But they're like, oh, you can write an article on our, site. That's not helpful. People need to see a face and a personality and a being to the message. And listen, we've come a long way with mental health, but it's still very stigmatized and it's very compartmentalized, right? I live in Chicago. People in Chicago, like I've reached out to news stations and you wouldn't believe they don't want to touch my subject.
Yeah.
They don't.
But I also think when it comes to, asking for help, I mean, you are one person spreading this message and you're doing such an amazing job. And, we are focused on really breaking the stigma around mental health. And I applaud you for it. But I think for the ones who are in need of help, I know that, some of the books, especially the Louise Hay book, for example, in the back of her book, there will be organizations, names, numbers that you can email, addresses that you can contact, and you can reach out if you have a difficult time. There are support groups listed. And I was even thinking, that is very helpful for somebody that's reading the book. Do you have something like that? Or do you reach out to organizations like that?
Well, I have numbers. So I always say to everybody, they should have these numbers in their phone. The National Suicide Prevention Helpline, it's 24/7. It's 1-800-273-8255. And self-harm is very important. The text line 741-741, the self-help number, harm number 1-800-448-3000, or you could text voice to 20121. I made sure I had the resources in my book to help people when they feel hopeless. But what is not talked about, and it's very sad, and I can say this about myself, I'm not going to be in denial. I'm always very honest when it comes to how I deal with mental health. When someone's in a major depressive episode, and this goes along with the people I worked with all these years in mental health facilities, when you're in a deep depressive state, it is very difficult to call a hotline and connect with strangers. When I was going through what I was going through when I was young, would I have texted a self-harm line? Probably, maybe text. But for me, I find the relationships that I've had when I'm feeling super depressed, and even when I was feeling suicidal, I held a lot of it in, I did. So like having these numbers is huge. Knowing how to help friends and family get through mental health struggles is huge. It's all about trust. So I believe everybody should have these numbers, but I also believe, I wrote in my blog on Medium how to help somebody who is dealing with suicidal thoughts and self-harm, because not everybody's trained. No one knows what to say. It's a very slippery slope of how to, when you're feeling like you want to die or hurt yourself, reach out. That's the hardest part.
Yeah. There are certain groups where it's the order of the day to say, what happens in this house stays in this house. Yeah. And in some religious beliefs, you have to go through Judaism, I believe.
And I'm Jewish.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Drew, because I know you're Jewish. Yeah. Through the rabbi first.
I'm going to interrupt. It depends on how religious you are. And it depends if the Jew wants to go talk to the rabbi. Because, there's all different levels of Judaism. And I grew up very, conservative Jew. That's pretty religious. And you don't have to go talk to the rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
in Catholicism and different religions with priests, and Judaism is very different with that, but it depends how religious you are, honestly.
Okay. So, but I have heard, what happens in what happens in this house stays in this house. And so, you don't necessarily have that access to freely go and seek help at a hotline or a call or a therapist or anyone outside of the home. And in those circumstances, I guess it comes back to trust and safety. Yes. And so if you have a best friend, that is the person you go to. If you have a grandma that is not going to share your secret or whatever it is that you are sharing, that's the person that you go to.
But this is what's interesting. As a mental health professional, we always say that if you're going to tell somebody your quote unquote secret, that person has to know how to advocate services for you. So it's like, if my best friend comes to me and tells me they want to kill themselves or self-harm, it's my job, because what I'm trained in. Is the rabbi trained in this? Is the priest trained in this? Is the best friend? You have to say, do you have a plan? Meaning, do you have a gun? Do you have pills? Are you going to drink bleach? All of these things. Because the truth is, if your friend or somebody tells you a quote unquote secret about what's going on with them, and then they do this, right? And they end up dying, you have to carry that shame for the rest of your life. And the priest would, or the rabbi or whoever. So I think, again, it's like the education of knowing that the person you're going to is not only going to be there for you, but going to help you advocate the service to not go through with the self-harm and the suicide. And I think that is not talked about enough.
Yeah, that is absolutely well said. Yeah.
Because I think how I responded with the Judaism and the rabbi, it wasn't very articulate. It's all about somebody knowing the tools, how to save that person's life. Really.
Yes, you do need someone that can take you to the professional and prevent that from happening.
Have to. And I think what's really important to know too is, if you're in college, the residential advisor, you go talk to them about what your friend is feeling. If you are a teenager, you look on Facebook and find their mom and dad's message and reach out. If you don't have parents that you can trust, that you can call the hotline and ask what to do. So it's all about understanding where to get the information from. And if you yourself are feeling suicidal and you feel hopeless and literally want to die, it's all about coping skills and reaching out for help. For myself, when I was feeling suicidal, when I had postpartum, it was horrible. I had a plan with my family. I wasn't alone. I had, people calling me, helping me. It was very major. And there was a TikTok, I want to say a year ago, maybe a year and a half, where a man had been broken up or something with his girlfriend. He was fighting with her. And TikTok, as you know, age ranges very young, maybe 6, 7, 8, up to 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever. But this man took his own life on live. And this TikTok was circulating of a man blowing his head off with a shotgun. And it was such a raw, horrible thing to see, but it just showed in the moment, if somebody is feeling that dark, there is no thought. They are done. So I don't think this stuff is really discussed. And these images that are being shown to our children, a lot of those children are feeling those emotions, and they're not discussed how to manage those emotions. So it's very loaded, the conversation with suicide and self-harm.
Yes. And I mean, you also touch on this in your book. Do you want to share some about The Darkness Within and where we can find it?
Yeah. So The Darkness Within is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And if you Google my book, there are other outlets that you can get it from. It is really just a story of survival and resilience. It's my true story, and about the abuse I endured at the hands of my father growing up and how I have had to come out the other side. It's the darkness that I talk about that touches on relationships. It talks about abuse. It talks about, there's humorous moments, talks about when I met the first man I was vulnerable with, my husband. It talks about me working in mental health. I talk about the facilities I've worked at and their stories. I've talked about self-harm. I talk about suicide. It's really, I write how I speak, and I've had amazing reviews, out of all the reviews. Amazon reviews have been great. Barnes and Noble, there's one not so great review. But again, not everybody's going to like what you read. The world is not all the same. And, I'm all about criticism. I'm okay with that. And also Indie Reader, I got a 4.5 out of 5 rating. So people are getting it, and I'm helping people. So that's where you can find my story.
That's awesome. I'm going to link your Instagram handle in the show notes, because I want the listeners to head over to your page and go and experience those beautiful images that you put out every day.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're very welcome. Do you have any last words of inspiration that you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, I think my words of inspiration is to never underestimate the courage you have and the strength you have within yourself. And do not, as you get older, be afraid of vulnerability. I've met so many wonderful people where, again, I've met them through social media, but I've never been so vulnerable in my life, and it's healing. So kind of just have trust to open your mind and heart to not carrying the shame and leaving, a mark on the world. I think that's the words I can leave.
Those are very wise words. And I hope that this podcast reaches the younger generation.
I think so too. And I've talked to so many people about their own trauma and things they've never spoken to with anybody. And it's stayed with me, and I've never shared it, obviously. And I just think so many young people need connection and to be heard, and they feel so alone. So I'm really crossing my fingers this gets out to the masses of young people, including young adults, even older adults, middle age and older. Mental health is huge. It's for everybody.
Well, Drew, it's been such a pleasure having you join me today. I'm so glad we made this happen. Let me tell you, I am so glad. I'm glad my computer finally worked. We could actually do this. And I want to thank you for, the work that you do and for shedding light on not only trauma, but also mental illness through your memoir and starting the conversation to really end the stigma, because I think we need more conversations in order to heal the masses. Where we find ourselves now, even in COVID, we find ourselves in this collective traumatic experience. And I'm fortunate enough to have somebody that I live with, but so many people are alone in this time, and it affects their mental health. It affects it. And so we need to have the education, we need to get the message out there, and we have to get the tools out there to help. Because one of the things when you are isolated like that I've also come across is that you don't need a ton of money to start the healing process.
It's true. It starts within. And that's another thing about services. And because I advocated those services for people forever, even people who don't have health insurance or money, there are clinics and places to go where you can sign up to get everything paid for. It's all a matter of research. So that's huge. I'm so grateful you had me on, and I find you this bright light in the world. And, you're a survivor, and you're spreading, this light of your strength into other people by allowing them to share their trauma. So I am so grateful for you, and I am really appreciative of you having me on this show. So thank you.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.